Alright, what's up guys? It's the Ascension of Babylon. What we do here is we talk about the occult, we talk about spiritual self-development, and we talk about the healing process. If that's your thing and you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let's get right into it. So we're going to be talking about the number one thing that most human beings are running away from. So this could be your mom, your dad, your best friend, just society as a whole is running away from this one thing, and it causes all kinds of negative consequences. Violence in society, manipulation, oppression, all kinds of stuff like that. And that one thing is actually vulnerability. We all can relate to the experience of being afraid to be vulnerable, of being afraid to be seen, of being afraid to be judged or to be shamed. And because we have this fear inside of us, we will actually spend our whole entire lives creating these protective, defensive barriers. We do this with certain relationships. We do this at our job. We do this on social media. We do this, within ourselves primarily and first and foremost. So, in the form of addictions, identities, belief systems, and things of that nature. We will build up these very guarded walls because not only are we afraid of people actually seeing us, seeing the wide spectrum of who and what we actually are, but we're afraid of seeing those vulnerable parts of ourselves. We are deathly afraid of being vulnerable and being open and connecting with different parts of us that are holding on to fears, certain negative emotions, certain memories, wounded inner child parts of us that are afraid. In fact, some of these parts carry so much fear that if we allow them to resurface, the fear-based energy in our body can feel paralyzing. It can feel crippling to the point that it's hard to even continue on with our day in a coherent, functional state. This is the nature of what us as human beings are suppressing within ourselves. And we do this once again by forming belief systems, identities, definitely identities, certain relationships, we work hard to manifest a nice car, to have the life that looks, good on the outside, but it's actually rooted in a deep fear of having people see us. Once again, to see the wide spectrum that encompasses our being, or that comprises our being. We have both negative energies and positive energies inside of us. And as human beings, we generally mask away the negatives, like, oh, we don't want people to know about this. Oh, that thing from our past, we can't have people know that. Oh, we're in the work environment, so people can't see this part of me. Oh, we're at the family event, and we need to always look this way. And this is completely normalized. We literally tell ourselves a story about why we are doing it. Oh, it's because my boss can't see this thing, because I need to get that paycheck. It's the only way that I can survive. Oh, this is how it always was. This is how my dad was, and he raised us to be this way, and we just get up and we shut the fuck up and we go to work and we don't process our emotions because that's not what men do. Of course, women have their own way of doing this as well. But the point is we are trying to stop people from seeing all of us, because when people actually see us, when the light of their awareness shines into our energy field or into our being, it triggers that part to the surface, and on our end of things, we are afraid to feel the emotions that are triggered forth through the body coming from that part, when people are actually able to see that vulnerability. So many of us have lived our lives afraid to be vulnerable, because when we were children and we went through trauma, maybe somebody could have even potentially intentionally hurt us. Well, we were in a vulnerable state then, and we trusted that our parents were going to take care of us. We trusted that our caretakers were going to make sure that we didn't experience that traumatic event or whatever it was, and we were let down. So what happens is a part of us has to step up, and it has to play a role to where it projects a certain identity. It both creates and attaches to certain belief systems, kind of like the kinds of beliefs that I was referring to earlier, and it justifies the inner narrative that we create to keep ourselves from feeling that vulnerability again, because way back in our past, when we were children, when we were vulnerable, we were hurt, and we carry that pain, we carry that hurt and the energy of that trauma inside of our bodies. And we literally exist in a society where being vulnerable is promoted as a bad thing. I mean, we got things like the 48 Laws of Power. We got the entertainment industry, and, specifically for sure the music industry that promotes this idea that it's me, 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 and if it's not me, fuck you, motherfucker, and, all these violent lyrics, and, I'm making this amount of money, and, my girl looks like this, so I'm better than you, and you're just lowly, and you don't matter, and it's all rooted in the fear of just being open and just being genuine and being vulnerable. Being authentic, being open, and being genuine requires the capacity to actually be vulnerable. To be vulnerable with ourselves. And, being vulnerable with ourselves means also allowing other people to potentially see these more vulnerable parts of us, because even though we might potentially be afraid of being vulnerable, when we're honoring our process, there's going to be times where we take chances. We get into certain kinds of relationships, we connect with certain kinds of people, and we will allow them to see all of us. And I'm not saying just get into some toxic relationship, or if you feel someone's an unsafe person, just pour your heart out to them. I'm not saying that, but we also don't want to live on defense mode, to where it's like we have a part of us that's saying we can't trust people. We were hurt in the past, and therefore we cannot let people see these vulnerable parts of us. And once again, this is usually rooted in us also not wanting to see those parts. And the dialogue I described is usually deeply unconscious. It's not like this part is communicating with us, like we can't be vulnerable, we can't let people see us, and things of that nature. This is this unconscious dialogue that's inside of us that we're usually not actually aware of until we start connecting with these different parts of us, and we start, going through the process of regulating our nervous system and healing through trauma, which also implies that we are becoming more conscious of what is in the unconscious. So this is going to be certain beliefs, certain parts of us that we didn't know that were existing, and, the dialogue that I was mentioning earlier. The part of us that's subtly telling us that we can't trust people, that we can't form relationships with people, because every time we form a relationship, we get hurt, we get betrayed. And for a lot of us, this has been true because we've seen it inside of our reality, or in our reality. It's like, well, this must be the truth because I keep seeing it. But you can uncreate that reality by embracing vulnerability, because it's the part of you that's holding on to that fear, that very vulnerable, sensitive part, in combination with other parts of you that may actually be trying to keep you from that part, that puts you in energetic resonance with somebody who's lying to themselves to such an extent that they lie to you, that they manipulate you, that, they potentially betray you or stab you in the back in some way. So the answer is actually in allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. And it can start with really simple things. So like, for instance, how many of you're walking down the street or you're in the store and you have an interaction with someone and they're like, hey, what's up, man? How are you today? And you're really not good at all, but you just tell them, oh, I'm good, how are you? And you put on this fake smile and you put on this fake face because you've always done that. And it's likely that your parents, in either a more subtle way or just straight up told you that you need to wear this face and you need to fake it to make it and you need to be this way around people, even though that you felt very differently and you wanted to be a different way, but that's how you survived in your parents' household. And then we have a society that literally props up falsehood. We have things like hustle culture, where it's like hustle, 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 grind, grind, grind. And when we're doing that, what we're telling ourselves is we are only worthy of love if we have these things, if we have this house, if we have this car, if we have this money, if we look a certain way. And it's all this program that keeps us away from being vulnerable. And it just perpetuates the cycles that we will see what we're suppressing show up in different ways in our lives, but definitely show up in relationships. So the parts of you that are deathly afraid of being vulnerable, you might attract somebody that is also deathly afraid of being vulnerable in their own way. And these are people that are capable of hurting us, lying us, deceiving us, sometimes even people that potentially lack integrity, and they're willing to get over on you. And, once again, they're willing to lie and cheat and things of that nature, willing to sell you out in different ways because they've already sold out by suppressing their own wounded inner child parts. And to those of you who do this yourself, I'm not saying that it's black and white, that you're this person who's going out and betraying people in the world and gossiping and stabbing people in the back and stuff like that. But when we suppress different aspects of us, we do put ourselves in an energetic resonance to where, because we've betrayed ourselves, and through the principle of as within, so without, we attract betrayal. We attract people that do us wrong or do us dirty in different ways, or at the very least, we attract relationships that are actually not fulfilling because we're not fulfilled on an internal level. How can you be fulfilled when you're abandoning different parts of you? So whether we know it or not, when we're kind of living inside of a certain identity that has normalized not being vulnerable, this means we're betraying the parts that are underneath the surface of that identity. Typically, this is going to be wounded inner child parts that carry the emotions and the sensations of deep vulnerability, abandonment, grief, and things of that nature. And these parts of us are all collectively parts of what make us whole. So when we're abandoning those parts, we can't be whole. And when we're not operating from more of a unified kind of awareness or a unified field of awareness, we're going to attract people and attract circumstances that show us what we're resisting and show us our fragmentation. So if you've ever been through like extreme abuse and forms of neglect in certain relationships and friendships and stuff like that, it was never all them. And I can almost guarantee that on an unconscious level, you were actually using that relationship to try to avoid feeling vulnerable and connecting with these more so sensitive, wounded inner child parts of you, because the relationship is something that you idealized. And once again, this could be a very unconscious thing. You probably didn't know it, but there's a part of you that thought, oh, if we get into this relationship, the sex is great, I'll say the sex is great. We feel good when we're in relationship and we think about the idea of this relationship. Of course, that causes your dopamine to spike. So, in other words, you're getting a feel-good chemical release from the relationship. This also could become an addiction. But then you get brought back to those really low lows, because that's what you were avoiding the whole time, the parts of you that were already feeling low. And it's not just relationships we do this with, it's many different kinds of things that we form relationships with, and we're not knowing it when we're forming these relationships to certain ideas, belief systems, identities, our job, substances for sure, different kinds of addictions. We don't know we're doing this, but we're actually forming that relationship to try to bypass just being vulnerable and feeling the emotional states that are connected to these parts of us that have been in that fearful, abandoned, trapped kind of energetic resonance since we went through early childhood trauma that we didn't know how to process. And then we had to create a protective response around that trauma just to survive it, just to function in our friend circles, in our home, growing up with our parents, at school, and then in everyday life. And then everyday society made us feel like it was normal because this is the program that society runs. This is the conditioning. It's on TV. It's in music. It's in all types of things. So this is why most people are completely unconscious of the fact that they're not truly honoring themselves, that they're running away from being vulnerable. And this is something that I did for most of my life. I used to be a gangster. I mean, look at my face. Some of you can probably tell off the rip that these are gang tattoos. At least a majority of them are. And of course, I don't live that life anymore. I'm not a gangster. I'm not in a gang or anything like that. My old self was very afraid to be vulnerable. And I created this entire mask where I was literally not only willing to harm people, but I was out actually doing it. I was really hurting people badly. And I normalized it, and I created an identity out of it, and I created a story about it. Like, oh, this motherfucker wants beef with me? I'm going to go put some holes in him, or I'm going to go do this other thing to him, or whatever it was at the time, right? I'm going to, get involved with this act of violence because I live in a dog-eat-dog world, and I need to let motherfuckers know that I am not to be played with. I normalized this, and it was true. In the reality that this is important to understand, that I created, it was true that being vulnerable was dangerous. But it doesn't change the fact that, of course, my lack of education and my lack of awareness was creating that environment. It was just reflecting back to me how fragmented and how traumatized I was inside, and reflecting back to me what I was actually resisting. And I also used substance abuse and certain relationships all to run away from being vulnerable. And then when I did start becoming more self-aware, I used occultism and spirituality to avoid being vulnerable. You can use something that would be healthy for someone that has we can say a more authentic relationship with it. in a way that's not necessarily healthy for you. So like I created this whole image of I'm this black magician, and basically what I was telling the collective without saying it was, you need to be afraid of me. And it's because that old self gangsta gang member kind of energy was still in me. And when I was a gang member, I did things intentionally to make people afraid. And even though I didn't know it at the time, deep down, I was deathly afraid. And you know what I was afraid of? Being vulnerable. And just admitting that I am deeply depressed, that I feel abandoned, that I feel alone, that I, have all these wounded parts of me that I'm avoiding, and I'm putting on this entire mask just to avoid. So by trying to convince other people that I didn't have these vulnerabilities that I viewed as weaknesses, all I was doing is actually trying to convince myself. So I created this whole entire reality where people viewed me as someone to fear, where people viewed me as somebody that you don't want to fuck with. And it was all my way of running away from these deeper vulnerabilities that are existing inside of me, or that were existing inside of me. And of course now, I have vulnerability, and I embrace those vulnerable states. And getting into like the occult or getting into spirituality, I realized that vulnerability is the pathway to God. It is the pathway to the source, and living in a way to where we are attuned with that source energy consciousness, attuned and embodying it. You become what you always were, a physical representation of God. But if the source is all things, or if God is all things, that also means that you have to embrace all of the different parts of you to unify with this thing that we call God. God is all identities, all viewpoints, all things, all at once. And of course, you. The source experiences itself through you, and you are both the painted and the painter at the very same time. So you have to be like source, and you have to be like source with the willingness to experience yourself through all of these different parts that make up your universe. But this doesn't mean that you let them run you unconsciously. This doesn't mean that you feed negative personality traits or, behaviors that aren't the healthiest and things of that nature. It means you might see that there are parts of you that are using those personality traits or using those behaviors to keep you away from these deeper, more vulnerable parts. You have compassion for these parts of you, but you understand that you don't want to live in the negative cycles that these parts are creating for you. And of course, simultaneously, while you're acknowledging these different protector parts of you, so it's the protector parts that keep you away from the deeper vulnerabilities, you're giving yourself the opportunity to be open to the resurfacing of those more so sensitive parts, so you can unify all of your parts. So rather than working against you, they're now working for you in the unified field of awareness that you always were, but you got disconnected from when you went through trauma and you had to cover up your vulnerability. You had to hide it from your parents, your friends, and from the world, because that's what you were taught to do. So there is so much value in being vulnerable, but this is what a lot of us have actually ran away from our whole entire lives. But by allowing ourselves to be open and to be vulnerable and to even have that vulnerability seen by people, what we're saying to the universe is, I trust you to nurture me. And even though I'm afraid to be vulnerable, maybe I'm afraid to feel these emotions, I'm afraid of what people think, I'm afraid that people might judge me or shame me, I know the willingness to be vulnerable is going to put me in a resonance to where I am going to be nurtured and I'm going to be okay. And even if my vulnerability leads me into a difficult circumstance, I will come out on top and I will embody my authentic self in a world where people are masking, where people are shaming others and judging others and are in a constant state of psychological projection, because it just shows what they're resisting inside of themselves. It just shows that they are afraid to be vulnerable. You don't have to be this kind of person. You can wear your heart on your sleeve and be authentic. It's okay. This is what I wanted to share today. This is the number one thing that most people are running away from. But you can allow yourself to be vulnerable. And if you do, I promise you, you will be taken care of by the universe. You will be nurtured. So yeah, once again, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next video.